And I think what we need as men who often have been untethered from a really good fathering influence is we have to get back to first principles. We have to get back to, is there divine revelation for us about the purpose of family? And this is true for everyone. If you have a dad, you still need access, and you still need to build your life on these divine first principles.
My life was just spiraling downhill.
Depression, alcoholism, incarceration, deaths by despair.
The one guy who showed up is just Jesus.
If you can give a man clarity and community, he can start to live out his purpose.
You can break generational curses of alcoholism.
Welcome to Dudes Without Dads, the show that trains men how to become the dads they never had. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Joshua. Thanks for having me, man.
Hey, I want to get the number one question that I'm sure you get all the time out of the way. And what is the connection between you and Richard Pryor?
Well, there is no, as I'm sure you're shocked to find out, an actual family connection. Yeah, Richard is, and we're not nearly as funny as he is. So we're very proud that we share a name, but he came up with that name. So he took the name Pryor, and technically I'm not a Pryor either. My great grandfather took his stepdad's name. And so the thing that connects me and Richard is that neither of us are related to anyone with the last name of Pryor.
Oh, it's so good. Y'all were related to nobody Pryor. That's so rich. Hey, thank you so much again for being a guest. And I've got just some quick questions to set a foundation for our conversation today. And when I look around, our city, I look around our schools, I look around our communities, it sure would appear that the idea of family is a little broken. Yeah. And would you just start by helping us understand what went wrong?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's important for everyone to have a thesis or some kind of idea for what they think happened, right? And yeah, to your point, it is broken. That's not controversial. I mean, America just became the number one country in the world for single parent households. Our divorce rate, hovers around 50%. A lot of people don't know how odd that is. In India, the divorce rate's 1.1%. That's how different we are than these other countries. So if you look at times in history or countries in which family and marriage is extraordinarily stable, and it is really designed to be extraordinarily stable. In most times in history, it was a very rare thing for this to fall apart. Today, it's very common. What happened? So yeah, my hypothesis is that we actually don't know what family is. We are experimenting with a brand new idea in the last 150 years. We've totally redefined the family. Most of us who are listening to this today, of course, we've all been born into a culture, unless you were born in another country that has a much more ancient idea of family. You were born into a culture where this experiment started way before you were born. And so you're not aware that you're participating in a very novel experiment, but it went way off the rails. Like this idea of family that we have that's very recent, which I think of as a springboard for individual success. That's kind of the way that our culture thinks family. That's what we think a family is. And so we don't really understand what ancient families were or what even the Bible describes family to be. And this, unfortunately, is also true, just as true in the Christian world as in the secular world. The Christian world has fully adopted the secular ideas of family, the secular definition of family. We've held on to, the Christian morals around family, but not the Christian design or the biblical design of the family. And so we are usually a 10 to 20-year lagging indicator on what happens in the culture, happens within the Christian community shortly thereafter, because this design of the family is inherently unstable and doesn't actually work well at all, and is very unfulfilling, particularly for men. And this is why I think fathers bow out of family in such enormous numbers. So in these ancient cultures and some of these older countries, fathers are the most likely to stay with their children. Fathers are the most likely to invest in their family. Fathers are the ones who value the family the most. These fathers think about their lives in and through the family. This new idea of family that we have adopted and sort of created since the Industrial Revolution about 150 years ago, and it's got it more and more, it's sort of a hyper-maternal idea of family. It's like the idea of the family is sort of nurturing, nest, and that's why we use the word nest often to refer to what the family is. And when people's kids leave, they're empty nesters. This analogy is very strange historically, but it makes a lot of sense of the way we do family today.
Yeah, what you said makes my brain like do a 360 or a 180. When you say that the Christian morals or the Western view of doing family is followed by the Christian view where there's not a whole lot of difference, I'm just going to ask you a question. Can we be Christian and Western at the same time?
There is a huge division between what the Bible teaches and what sort of modern Western culture teaches. So the most basic idea of understanding of modern Western culture is really hyper-individualism. The idea is that the highest value in society is the free choices of the individual, and by freedom we often mean the freedom to indulge our impulsive or compulsive impulses. So that's what freedom is almost defined by in our culture. And there was a survey done where they asked people what is an American, and they sort of summarized the answer is that I get to do what I want to do when I want to do it, and nobody better tell me otherwise. So it's just we famously started through a revolution, and we lionized the conquering of the West by the rugged individual, and then the homesteader who goes out and leaves the family, and all of this was done by people leaving the old world. And so you had people that were the most individualistic, leaving other countries and coming to America, settling and really setting up the value structure for America. And I think individualism is there's a time and place for it. Like there's a freedom, even the kind of freedom we celebrate as a culture. There's a time and place for that within a hierarchy of values. The question is where on the hierarchy is. This is why Jesus was asked, and this is why the Pharisees and all the religious people of Jesus' day were obsessed with this question: which is the greatest commandment? Because they understood something that we don't understand, and that is that the ranking of the commandments, the ranking of values, is actually what's critical. It's not important for me to find out that you think that freedom is important or that you value freedom. That doesn't matter. I mean, at some level, everybody values freedom. Is always where does that fit in a hierarchy of values? Is there anything you value more than freedom, right? And so that then determines, and it's really that hierarchy of values that starts to unpack what people really believe about the reality of life. And so there's something about the sort of extreme version of Western individualism that breaks down communities, breaks down relationships, because at some level, if I try to build a relation with you and I really want to value love or unity above individualism, then if I value individualism more than those things, then eventually I have to sacrifice love. I have to sacrifice unity for my individualism. And that's considered in our culture today increasingly a moral virtue, to put yourself first. David Brooks said it this way. He said, when Americans become wealthy, they purchase loneliness. And so we have this loneliness epidemic, which is that we try to accumulate wealth and then we use the wealth to become as lonely as possible. And
Wow.
it's not obviously what we're really trying to do is just value individualism, but that's the net result.
Wow. And so if I were to summarize what you just said, because I asked you kind of a question of, can you be a Christian and also Western in the way that we live out our ideals or individuality or materialism? And you said there's grace, is what I heard you say. But you didn't leave us there. There's this idea that once we come and encounter grace, there's an expectation for growth or birth. And so let me ask you this. I'm a dude without a dad. I never met my father. He died, before I could have a chance. Where do I begin by understanding and building the foundation of what a family is supposed to look like?
Yeah, it's really important to start with, I think, what was in God's heart, his mind, when he first created this thing called the family. Like we actually have, this is the advantage Christians have over sort of modern secular culture, is that we have an account of exactly what God was thinking when he created the first family. Like what was he thinking? What was its purpose? And so we see in Genesis 1, 26, 27, 28, if you read those passages, When God created the first family, he says over this family,
I want to thank you for taking time to listen to this story. And if there's something inside of here that is adding value to you, I want you to stop and hit subscribe. I am on mission to help men become the dads they never had. Many of us struggle with father wounds, addictions, identity issues, and really what we need is we need a model. We need to see people that have broken the patterns and come alongside of them. I want to simply invite you to join me on the journey. Every Thursday, we're going to release a new episode. Each episode is going to help you and others become the dads they never had. Hit subscribe and share with a friend. Now let's get back to the story.
be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, rule. So he created this family, created this male and female. He tells them that, that he gives them his image, and then he gives them a purpose that was not given to a corporation, a nonprofit. It was given to a family, and that purpose is this 5-part purpose: to be fruitful, multiply, fill, subdue, and rule. And what you see in these ancient cultures, and I think what we need as men who often have been untethered from a really good fathering influence, is we have to get back to first principles. We have to get back to, is there divine revelation for us about the purpose of family? And this is true for everyone. If you have a dad, you still need access, and you still need to build your life on these divine first principles. And so when I look at that definition, that description of the purpose of the family, to be fruitful, multiply, fill, subdue, and rule, we need to start building those kinds of families. Like we're fruitful, that means to have children. We multiply, that means to have grandchildren. We fill, that means that there's a expansive nature to what we're doing as a family with our children and grandchildren to expand. And then we subdue, we take ownership or rulership over the entities that of influence in our society. And then finally, we rule, which is that, I think on this side of the cross, that really is all about making disciples who make disciples. Jesus said, go out and make disciples of all nations. We rule through giving the kingdom back to the king, right? We are all about seeing people learn to obey the king. But this is the purpose of family. It was designed to accomplish this 5-part mission.
Yeah, it's kind of deep, because in my head, I think I can kind of do whatever I want to do. What's the greatest argument to fight that lie? Because in my head, I feel like I have the right to have as many kids as I want, and if I don't want to have any, or to kind of map out my own map. What's the greatest argument against that ideology?
Well, I think it depends if you're a Christian or non-Christian. If you're a Christian, I think the greatest argument is that we have divine revelation directly opposing that ideology, that viewpoint, right? We are told in Scripture that children are a blessing, right? I think that if you're coming from more of a secular lens, I think the greatest argument is what happens to civilizations. Actually, everyone puts themselves first; they implode, and that's what's starting to happen to countries all over the world. We have a situation in South Korea right now where it takes 100 South Koreans to make 4 great-grandchildren. That country will not exist in 100 years at their current trajectory. And no one's ever taken a country that is below replacement rate and actually returned it back to something that's more stable. And so we're going to see civilizations cease to exist. We're going to see economic collapse, kinds of areas in ways that we've never seen. And it's a very sad thing to watch the complete implosion of cultures, of family lines, because people want to put themselves first. It also just doesn't work in terms of mental health. It's one of the worst things you could ever do is just design your entire life around what you want, your own happiness. We know that meaning comes from giving yourself to something bigger than yourself. And so one of the amazing things about having kids, and just believe what the Bible says, that children are a blessing, is that when you start having children, it's God's way of discipling you immediately into an other-centered point of view. And that's one of the most important things that you can embrace. And so to say, I'm going to resist having children, or I'm going to have a smaller number so that I can really indulge my own selfish needs, when you do that, it's not like what you're doing is actually benefiting you in the long run. Oftentimes what it's happening is that you are putting yourself in a situation where you're insisting that the world orbit you. And that is just that's a counterproductive way of understanding the world. And in terms of the way that your life ends up turning out over time, you begin to experience the bleed of meaning from your life. your life becomes more and more meaningless. And if you struggle with finding all those little hits of happiness from entertainment or from small accomplishments, and if that ever gets disrupted or dysregulated, then man, you're in big trouble. And that's what a lot of people hit when they hit their midlife crisis. They're just like, they don't know what to do at that point because they have had everything orbit themselves, but it's really lacking this center of meaning. And I feel so unfortunate for men and women who are getting their 50s and 60s, who have no grandchildren, who have no way of like actually valuing the future the way that we're designed to. They're not being surrounded by the family that God's given them, or the spiritual family that they've made through disciple making. They just made their life all about themselves. And in doing that, they're living in this small, isolated world. And we have this epidemic in our culture now of our elders, who the Bible says over and over again to honor, are dying in isolated nursing homes with almost no human contact. And that's what happens when we follow this sort of secular value set.
Would you give me a vision for a desirable future according to original design? You know, when you think about the 5 pillars, from a practical way of building this thing called family, would you kind of just cast the vision of what family ought to look like?
Yeah. There's actually a whole chapter in the Bible that just is designed to answer this question, which is Psalm 128. And Psalm 128 starts by just saying, you know, blessed is the man who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. And then it goes on to describe his life. It says that he is like a fruitful vine, that his children are like olive shoots around his table. His wife is like a fruitful vine. It says, thus is the man blessed who fears the Lord. And then it goes on at the very end to say, may you live to see your children's children. And so in biblical times and in ancient cultures, the idea of the good life, and it's the same, by the way, the way that the biblical story describes the good life, right? You have in the first chapter of Genesis, or the first couple chapters, God is walking with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day, right? He's spending time with them. You see that Jesus, right before he died, he desperately wants to share a meal with his disciples. Like, he wants to get his spiritual sons in a room and experience a meal. And when they sit down at that table, he says, I so have been longing to share this meal with you, right? You see Jesus in Revelation, the end of his letters to the churches, say, like, I stand at the door and knock. Like, would you please let me in so we can have a meal together? And then, of course, at the very end of Revelation, the culmination of this entire story of human history, it's a father sitting at a table, right? The wedding supper of the Lamb, feasting with his spiritual children, and that we're all part of this one household. This is why God calls himself a father. This is why Jesus called himself a son. So this is the good life. The good life is really to saturate ourselves in sort of the goodness of the most meaningful relationships that exists in life. And those are familiar relationships. And the ones that are beyond family, like our relationship with the church, other believers, our relationship with God himself, all of those are also familial in the way that God describes them. We're adopted into God's family. He becomes our father. Jesus is a son and a brother. And then in our family, everyone at the Shabbat table, the Sabbath table, we do a family meal every week, is a son or daughter. We want to experience our family nest. So the father sits at the head of the table. You have the mother, you have, sons and daughters, grandfathers and grandmothers, aunts and uncles. So these familiar relationships are really the place where you get the maximal meaning. But I think that what's happening in our culture in the West is that we've been so traumatized by these relationships, because whether you like it or not, you have these father, mother, brother, sister shaped holes in your heart, right? And so you need these relationships. And so somebody who underperforms or violates you in one of those relationships, it can take that place in your heart and really turn it cold. The problem with that, of course, is that you're going to then not be able to experience that in your relationships in proper and healthy ways. And so it's really important that we restore and recover those parts of our heart through building strong family connections, through creating a spiritual family that's dynamic with fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters, through having a relationship and dynamic relationship with God as our Father. And we're committed to healing those things. We can't move on to some other story. And this is unfortunately what's happening in our culture, is that people are really advocating now for alternative communities and alternatives to the family, right? There's been wide scale movements to try to destroy the family and say that, look, this is an experiment that doesn't work. It's unequal. It creates so much pain in people's lives. Like, we need to come up with new ways of forming human relationships. And instead of kind of humbly saying, maybe we're operating through a broken blueprint of family, we're saying, let's just jettison the whole thing. This entity that's been working and has worked in, in many, many cultures for thousands of years. And the Bible really communicates as important that God founded himself, and that the gospel itself is communicated through familial language, as God is our father and the church is our brothers and sisters and Jesus is a son. Like, let's just get rid of all of that. And there have been experiments. There have been kind of like very progressive social experiments. And in Israel, for example, there was a kibbutz movement. I have some friends that grew up in kibbutzim in Israel. And one of the things they experimented with this is sort of radical communism, where all the children are raised in a children's home. And it was really created in order to it's like a radical egalitarian experiment where everyone in the community, men and women, could not have any kind of distinct relationships within the family, because that destroys the perfect equality of the communist collective. And so they have a community of maybe 500 people. They would raise their 150 kids in this children's home. They would get to visit their kids once a day or so. And man, they were well raised, well educated. Like, they did a really good job of giving those children the basics of what they need. And there's been a lot of sociologists who've gone in and done the research, and it has been incredibly devastating for those kids. They needed a mother, they needed a father, they needed a clarity of who their siblings were and what that family unit was. Like, there is no substitute for this. We have to fight for it. We have to recover it. We can't just move on and try something new.
Well, being a dude that never had a dad, that means I also never really had a family. So grandparents, uncles, cousins, nothing. And so I'm interested in building a family team, and a legacy. But what are the most common things that I need to stop doing? And then what are the most common things I need to start doing in order to build this legacy? Because I haven't seen the things that you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I would say one of the first things I think we have to stop doing is we have to stop attaching our identity to other much, much less important, less valuable things. So fathers in particular, if you want to found a strong, dynamic family, primarily thinking of yourself through a work-based identity, for example, and then maybe encouraging your wife to do the same. This is devastating to the family. And I think it often starts with the father saying, no, look, I'm first and foremost leading this family. And when I go to work, I'm going to work hard. I'm going to try to do a great job, for my employer or starting a business. As I do that, my identity is not going to shift. I'm not going to switch teams. I'm not going to primarily join that other team and try to find an identity through that and become a workaholic and indulge in some other thing. I first and foremost care about this family. I am leading this family. And when I go to work, I'm not doing it as an atomized individual to try to figure out who I am. I know who I am. I'm the father of this family. And so I think that kind of identity clarity is so important. And so a lot of times it has to start there, because if you ever try to give, tips and tricks to mothers and fathers who want to see their family life improve, but they are indulging in these sort of lesser identities as the primary way that they're finding their worth, and that they are even telling the story of who they are, this is going to hurt their family. It's inevitable. They're going to put those things ahead of the family. The kids are going to sense that that's what's going to happen, and they're of course going to, by extension, encourage their children to do the same thing. You're going to have to go out and you're going to have to become a great soccer player so that you can become someone. You're not someone because you're a son in this family or a daughter, right, in this family. You need to go out and find out who you can be out there as an individual. So that's kind of like, I would say that's kind of one of the first things that you have to stop doing. You have to understand that who you say you are, we are being taught a lie in our culture that these other identities are more valuable. And that when we get together, if you hang out with people outside of your family context, oftentimes family doesn't even come up. What do you do? We tell kids when they're in school, who do you want to be when you grow up? We skirt around this idea of the centrality of family identity. And this is incredibly unusual historically. It's another thing I just think is so important for people to understand. It's, the Bible certainly speaks to this centrality of the family identity from Genesis to Revelation, but also every ancient culture that has built a thriving civilization has also had at the center of it this kind of idea of family. And it's really recent that we've started to think about what's really important is you as an individual. So I would say that's one of the first things that we should stop doing.
Gotcha. And so when I think about, okay, I'm willing to give up whatever I've got to give up in order to have whatever God's designed for me. And so, what are some game changer behaviors, activities? What are some things that I can practically do tomorrow, tonight, to start changing the game inside my home?
Yeah, I would say that like my favorite place to start, and this will shift identities pretty dramatically, is to have a weekly multi-generational family meal. So a lot has been said about kind of the weekday meal where families get to eat together, but oftentimes what happens in those meals is you're catching up, briefly before everyone kind of heads off into their own evening activities, which I think is so important. Those weekday dinners are really helpful. But what I've noticed in ancient cultures, and this really came from our time in Israel, I saw while we were living there. I met my wife in Israel. We were living in Jerusalem. I was constantly surrounded by these incredibly strong multi generational families, and I really tried to understand what was it that they did differently. And so the one practice that was so common, that was basically ubiquitous across Israel, was that every single family would do this Sabbath dinner every Friday night. And so, you would go to the bus station on Friday night, and everyone would be heading to their parents' houses. Even adults in their 30s with their own small children were heading off to grandma and grandpa's house, and they were there for the entire Sabbath. Like they were going to show up on Friday night. They were going to have this really lengthy, beautiful meal. Everything shuts down in the whole country on the Sabbath, and then you would spend the 24 hours together as a family. It was such a beautiful picture. And of course, if you do that every single week, that is your practice where we just work together. We have this amazing meal where we get to, and it begins with the fathers blessing the sons, and the mothers blessing the daughters, and the husband blessing his wife. And it's just like all of these blessings. And so you're sort of saturated in this sort of family language. Everyone is living out in the course of that meal this sort of their family identities. It's so beautiful. And I don't think you can stop a family from becoming deep multi-generational if you have a practice like that. And that's what we just kept seeing. In fact, when the Jewish people, when they moved to Western countries, they are maybe the most resistant ethnic group to adopting this modern idea of family than any other ethnic group. Usually, with most immigrant groups, within 2 generations, they will become fully Americanized from a perspective of total individualism. But Jewish families that continue to practice the Sabbath dinner, the Sabbath kickoff dinner on Friday night, they tend to maintain those multi-generational connections and those family identities across generations, even for 3, 4, 5 generations living in America. And so I saw that as a father who is not Jewish, and just thought, man, that is such an incredibly powerful tool. It's worked for thousands of years. It's the only tool I've seen that really works while people are fully immersed in Western civilization, Western cultures. And so we started to adopt this about 20 years ago as a family, and it totally transformed my family. And so we started training other families to do this. You don't have to call it a Shabbat or a Sabbath or whatever. You can do it on Sunday afternoon or whatever, but there's different ways to do it. But if you have this sort of timeless meal, you have this table culture that you develop as a family. And in that table culture, everyone gets to experience their familyness. You're never more than 6 days away from having a feast with your family. And it becomes the pinnacle of the week for the children, a pinnacle of the week for the mom and dad. It's a place where the grandparents, if they're connected to the family, get to also experience what that season of life is like. Where just on this last Sabbath, it was Mother's Day, this Sunday, and so on our Friday night, I just said, hey, I'd love for all of y'all to share stories of your, what's a memory or of your mother. How are you well mothered? And so, my dad told stories about, my grandmother, my kid's great grandmother, my grandkids. My grandson is there now. I've got 3 grandkids. Their great grandmother. And so and she had been at our Shabbat table, about 7 years ago. She died in her 90s, and when she was sitting there at our table, she was spanning 7 generations of our family. She could remember 3 generations that had come before her, and she was seeing 4 generations after her. And so anyway, this kind of meal brings makes the peak of meaning a place that is saturated in family life. And so it becomes this incredibly beautiful experience that you have on a weekly basis.
As I'm listening, there's something within my head and heart where I'm a little bit frustrated. I've worked at 7 different churches. I've, been in this thing called discipleship or this journey for 27 years. And I have not seen this practiced inside of anybody's. Like, if this is the way it's supposed to be, why am I not seeing people practice it? Like, shouldn't this be something I learn when I first come to know Jesus as my savior and I start getting discipled? I'm I've not seen what you're talking about, and so there's a little bit level of frustration. Why haven't I seen it? And then where can I find so I can see this?
Yeah. Well, there was a systematic purging of anything that could be considered Hebraic from the church in the 4th century. So a lot of people are unaware of kind of Christian and church history. But what happened was that there was a time when Christianity became the official religion of the empire, that one of the main concerns that they had were making sure that Jewish people, and Jews were a huge number of people in the Roman Empire. They were about 10% of the Roman Empire was Jewish. This is why where Paul could go anywhere and find a thriving Jewish community anywhere in the Roman world. They were massive ethnic minority, and they were also extremely committed to their religion. And so when Constantine and the other emperors were beginning to transition the entire empire to Christianity, they were very concerned that Jewish people would be feigning a conversion to Christianity, and so in doing that, and there was enormous anti-Semitism at the time, and so the only way that they knew to make sure that none of these Jewish people would come into the church and be sort of fake converts was to investigate their lives and ensure that they weren't importing into the church any practices that are Hebraic. And so the Shabbat dinner was outlawed. I mean, you were not allowed to keep the Sabbath on in any kind of Jewish way at all. Passover outlawed. Like, you could not do it in these Christian cultures. And so there was it was a very effective, complete
So
purging of every Hebraic tradition from the church, because the church, of course, started with all Jews. It was a completely Jewish movement, and Jesus and the apostles. And so you what you wanted to see was like what the way that Paul describes it in Ephesians, like this beautiful one new man where Gentiles and Jews are coming together, and there's this beautiful creation of the unity between these people of God, the people from the old covenant and the people from the new covenant all coming together in Christ, right? That's what you wanted to see. But what happened in practice was that the Gentiles were really oftentimes taking revenge on Jewish people. There's a history to animosity that happened in the 2nd and 3rd century between Jews and Christians. And so when the Christians ultimately were successful in sort of taking over the Roman Empire through Constantine and other emperors, unfortunately, the backlash against Jewish people was significant, and that continued on throughout the next 1,000+ years of church history. And so I think to this day, people that even hear this are primarily asking themselves, not, would this meal bless my family? They're asking themselves, does this meal make me like Jewish? Like, do I have to be Jewish to do this? When you ask that question first, of course, then you think you put this in an ethnic category, right? Instead of a natural family building category. And instead of honoring Jewish people who have done an incredible job of preserving this incredible practice of a multi-generational meal and learning from them and adopting that, we're basically saying, well, as long as it's not Jewish, we're going to do something else. And so anything that could possibly have that kind of attachment to the Hebraic, we tend to have a reversion to. And I think there have been people who have gone too far as well. They're like, basically believe that Christianity should become completely Hebraic, or that we should go back to, keeping Old Testament laws, or that we're obligated to keep the Sabbath, all of which I don't believe. Paul was incredibly clear in Colossians. He said, let no one, judge you based on any Sabbath day or any festival. Like, there's no judgment. He said those things were all shadows of things to come, and the fullness is Christ himself. And so when we celebrate the Sabbath, it's completely Christ-centered. we always talk about how Jesus is the light of the world when we light our Sabbath candle, and we go over a section of the Gospels to really bring the life of Christ into our sort of discussion as a family on the Sabbath. So we see that even our ability to enter into rest comes because of the cross, because Jesus did the hardest work that we ever had to do. We can actually enter into not just body rest, but soul rest. I can just rest and enjoy my relationship with the Lord for 24 hours. What a beautiful experience. So we want to experience that. The early church, kept the festivals and kept the Sabbaths, but they were not obligated to, because the law was perfectly kept by Christ. And so our means of righteousness is through faith in Christ and not through our ability to keep the law. But I think sometimes we take that to an extreme, and therefore then we think, well, we don't really need any.
I want to thank you for taking time to listen to this story. And if there's something inside of here that is adding value to you, I want you to stop and hit subscribe. I am on mission to help men become the dads they never had. Many of us struggle with father wounds, addictions, identity issues, and really what we need is we need a model. We need to see people that have broken the patterns and come alongside of them. I want to simply invite you to join me on the journey. Every Thursday, we're going to release a new episode. Each episode is going to help you and others become the dads they never had. Hit subscribe and share with a friend. Now let's get back to the story.
There's no wisdom in the law. Like when Jesus said, to the Pharisees, the Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people, not people to meet the needs of the Sabbath. Well, that's the perfect articulation of how to think about this topic, which is that the Sabbath needs you. There's something your body, your soul, your family needs from this thing called the Sabbath. You don't need to serve it. You don't need to come up with a bunch of rules. You don't need to become some kind of legalist in order to experience this. But your body, your spirit, your soul needs this, and so does your family. I think, and they need rhythms like this. It doesn't have to be, like I said, it doesn't have to be a Sabbath rhythm. It needs, but you do need it within the course of your days, your weeks, your months. You need to have rhythms where your family gets to just turn everything else off and just get to be and experience their familyness, and that's what I think this provides.
Yeah, I love it. And I could literally talk to you forever because, getting into the 3rd and 4th century, a lot of things got jacked up in the early church. For me, the word missionary got jacked up, where it used to be meant sent by God, it ends up becoming sent by the church. And so in order to be a missionary, you had to go be sent by God and be sent by the church. And if you weren't sent by the church, anyway, long conversation there. I'm going to ask you just a blitz of questions. These are fun questions. It's to lighten things up, and then we're going to bring the thing to a close for today. But what's one question that every dad should ask his kid every week?
I always ask my kids, what's your high, your low, and your buffalo? So, what's something you experienced this week that was really awesome? What's something that really has got you down this week that you're wrestling with? And I really want to know emotionally, how are you doing? And then your buffalo, in our case, I always want to know, is there something that you've persevered through? Is there something that you wanted to stop doing, but you kept going? Because that's a character quality that every person, it's not an innate character quality. It's a character quality every person can develop. And so part of we do that through celebrating that. So that's the question we ask all of our kids every week.
Many homes, as you know, are broken, and dads only get maybe a few hours a week of their kids' time. If I only had 10 minutes to connect with my kids, what should I do?
I think you have to get close to their heart. I mean, you have to ask questions about that helps them dial in to what's going on inside. So the way I do that, we do one-on-ones with our kids, on a weekly basis. And so, I always want to know, how are you doing really? And I'll talk to them about the relationships in their life. Like, how's your relationship with your sister, with your mom, with me, with God? Those are like we talked about earlier, that's the deepest parts of life. And I really want them to open up and just honestly share with me how they're doing. But those are the kind of questions I find that really help them do that quickly.
All families have different types of cultures. Do you guys laugh together?
Yes.
What's one tool or one thing that you do with your family that makes them laugh every time?
Yeah. I would say that probably the way that we do that is through games. So my dad is a hugely into board games, and he hosts a board game, a game night with Papa every week, and it's so loud around that table. There's so much laughter, that it's just like it's 2 or 3 hours every week of just fun. We put a pickleball court in our backyard, so we go back there, and there's so much fun and laughter and teasing each other. And so I find it's really helpful to have a prop, like a game. Could be a group game, a board game, or like a physical game. But that's where I find it kind of starts to loosen up and unlock us a lot.
Yeah, so good. What's one conversation every dad needs to have with their son before he turns 13?
Mm, yeah, I think that the category that comes to mind is, what does it mean to become a man? Like, what is the essence of what is a man? Um, and so I think that kind of opens the door for, the conversations around identity, around sexuality, around relationships, around the future, around all the angst, the testosterone, the feeling that you need to become someone or conquer something. Like, all of those things, are desires that boys have, but I think that ordering those into a full understanding of masculinity or manhood is not like, we're not designed to figure that out on our own. We're designed to be guided into that journey by a father.
What's something that your kids would say that you do that you wouldn't naturally tell everybody you do this, but they really enjoy it when you do it?
So one of the weird things I do is I try to introduce to my kids fictional stories that move my heart. So on the Sabbath, usually after we've eaten, we've cleaned up, we've played games, I'll open a book like a Narnia book or Lord of the Rings or Wind in the Willows, and there are just like passages that just completely, like, they shape the way I think. And so I will read a little passage and let them experience that kind of vicariously through me. Sometimes I'll be smoking my pipe or whatever, and just like relaxed and want them to, and then I want to interact with them. But they definitely get my heart in those moments.
That's so good. Where can I find more information about you, Family Revision, family teams?
Yeah. Yeah, if you guys want, so yeah, like Josh, I wrote a book called Family Revision. If you're interested in kind of the big picture, and it has 7 of our major tools. Familyteams.com is a great place to go if you want to see all the things we're doing. And then I'm on all the socials. Love to interact with folks there. So would love to see you. And if there's anything we can do to help, we would love. This is our passion, is to see families really thrive and become teams. So if that's something that really hits your heart, we'd love to help.
Yeah. Would you share a little bit more about what you have inside of Family Teams? If someone's never heard of it, give a
Yeah.
quick overview, especially um, the part about encouraging, families to maybe even start businesses. Would you mind
Yeah.
sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. In addition to the books, the podcasts, we have something called Family Inc. So about 3 times a year, we open the cart. We train about 70 or 80 families a year that are going on a journey from kind of career life into a more entrepreneurial endeavor. And I just found that requires a lot of coaching. A lot of people are asking the question, am I wired to be an entrepreneur? And about 10% of people are wired to be an entrepreneur. And they think those are the only people that ever get to own assets. But there was a time, like I said, 150 years ago, everyone owned assets. They had land, they had trades. And so we've created this weird career category called the entrepreneur. Now it is really valuable. What the entrepreneur has that's unique is they have creative problem solving abilities. And so what I found is a hardworking family that doesn't have creative problem solving abilities, but has a coach or coaches with creative problem solving abilities, can actually launch assets and build businesses. And so that's what we do at Family Inc. And so I love getting to do that. Joshua, what you're doing with pressure washing, it's one of the things we do in that is we expose people to other entrepreneurs that have started businesses, especially that might be attractive to people within the Family Inc. sphere. So Joshua's business is one of those. We have about 30 ideas in our business library of business ideas that are working for other family teams. So yeah, we love coaching families. So that program lasts a month, a year, and you do 8 coaching calls a month for it's a year long. You have access to the business library, to a whole course, a video course on how to launch businesses. So yeah, we love getting to serve that community.
Yeah, I love what you just said. I think there's so much value there for anybody that's listening, that's thinking about raising up a family legacy, sustainability, scalability inside of a business as mission type mindset. I love it. Final question, and it's going to be the last thing that I ask you, and then we're going to sign you off. What's the most exciting thing you're seeing right now as it relates to family discipleship movement?
Hmm. The thing that's totally different that I didn't see coming is that this generation, I would starting with the millennials, the men of this generation want to spend time with their kids. And I would say, from my experience with boomer parents, with even Gen X parents, there's something totally different happening with this generation. And it's been so encouraging to me that you see this movement of dads who they want to have a connection with their kids. Now, of course, there's all kinds of exceptions to that, but that's been exciting. And I think that for us in the church to be able to really train those fathers. So a lot of dads are even coming to faith because they want to be good fathers for their sons and daughters. There's something in their heart that actually cares a lot about their kids. Anyway, I think that's so beautiful, and I'm very encouraged by that.
Yeah, so good. Jeremy, thank you for being a guest on the Dudes Without Dads podcast. I hope that you can be a reoccurring guest. You have so much wisdom. I even researched some of your books. You've got a lot to offer on Kindle and different ideas on how to get creative with your family. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And my prayer is that God would just continue to bless all that he puts inside of your hands. And thank you for being faithful.
Awesome. Thanks, Joshua, for having me.
Do you have an incredible story of overcoming the home that you were raised in? Or maybe the father wounds that were placed inside your life? If so, I want to share it with other dudes without dads. Simply go to dudeswithoutdadspodcast.com and apply to be a guest on the show. The reason it's important to share your story is because when you share what God has done for you, it helps other men believe that God can do it for them, and he can. To share your story, head over to Dudes Without Dads podcast today.